Hey everybody, Ben here. Before we dive into today's episode, I just wanted to take a moment to introduce you to Dagish Academy's phosphine certification program. Our video-based interactive program is one of the most comprehensive courses available on the topic of phosphine fumigations, and we cover everything you need to know from initial inspections and bidding all the way to the aeration and deactivation process at the end. And you'll also learn all about pest identification, calculating dosages, sealing the structure, and so much more. So if you're interested in learning more about this course, please reach out to us at training@dagishamerica.com. And hey, if you mention the podcast in your email, you'll receive a coupon code for 25% off the purchase price. Yeah, I said that right, 25% off the purchase price. So we look forward to hearing from you, and happy training. Now, on to the podcast. Hey everybody, welcome to Season 5 of Dagish America Presents. I'm Ben Harrell, host of the podcast, and as always, I'm so happy to have the opportunity to talk to you about the industry that I work in. Wow, I can't believe we made it to Season 5 already. I have to say, I've had a great time over the first 4 seasons getting to talk to so many experts from our industry. I've learned a lot, and I hope you have too. Now, last season, we went over the different steps involved in the actual process of fumigation, and we covered everything from inspection and bidding the job, prepping the facility, introducing the fumigant, and finally aeration and deactivation of the fumigant. And if you haven't had a chance yet, I highly recommend you go back and give Season 4 a listen. Now, while fumigation is a tried and true treatment method that, if applied properly, can control 100% of your pest problems, sometimes it's not always the first tool you should grab out of your proverbial pest control tool bag. So, in Season 5, we're going to discuss a wide variety of applications and chemicals that we use on a regular basis to control stored product pests. And to start, we're going to discuss what approach you should use when planning any kind of pest control or prevention plan, and that's integrated pest management. And to help us today, we've invited Blake Buckner, Director of Operations at Dagish America, to join us. So, please help me welcome Blake to the podcast. Blake, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Ben. How about yourself?
I'm doing terrific. It's a nice, bright, sunny day today, so the birds are chirping outside. It's a beautiful day.
Yeah, it's definitely warm, and what that means is that it's time for a busy bug season.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we definitely have that coming right around the corner for us. Absolutely.
That's right. Yeah.
So I know I've had you on the podcast every season so far, but I always like to start out by giving people an opportunity to kind of tell us who they are in relation to our industry, just in case some people haven't listened to your podcast episode in previous seasons. So if you would, just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, Ben, my current role is I'm the Director of Operations for Dagish America here in the States. And what that means is I basically run all of our service divisions, all of the fumigations and all the pest control operations that we do across the country. So it keeps me pretty busy. I've been with Dagish the second time now for just about 10 years. I'll be on my 10-year anniversary here in October. I was with Dagish previously many years ago. So I've been in the industry quite a long time. I know about a quarter of what you know, but
I don't know about that, but
I'm making my way towards being halfway educated. So that's me right now.
What a way to undersell yourself, right?
Yeah, I try to stay humble, but we do 300 to 400 fumigations a year. So I think I made the joke on our last podcast that the Dagish years, our fumigator years, are sort of like dog years. So yeah. I've got a pretty dense knowledge base on pest control, especially from the fumigation side.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know that, kind of our bread and butter, our mainstay really is fumigation. That's something that you and I both have worked on primarily in our industry for most of our careers, I think. But I do know that we also do quite a bit of work in, just kind of a little bit of general pest control. And we also try to follow the integrated pest management approach. And that's kind of what we're talking about this season is the IPM approach or different methods of treatment that kind of fall a little bit outside of fumigation, but also kind of encompass fumigation at the same time. So I just kind of wanted to talk to you about integrated pest management or IPM today. That's kind of the goal. And I just wanted to start out by asking you what your definition of integrated pest management is.
Yeah, it's funny that in my short second career here in the 10 years that how much it's evolved. And I wouldn't go as far as to say that it's divisive, but there are so many varying degrees and opinions on what IPM is. Really, at the end of the day, it all comes down to the same principles, and it's a science-based approach, a way of making sustainable decisions in pest management. And of course, like you said, we're in fumigation and it has its role there. And I think in its implementation, IPM was viewed in our industry, the fumigation industry, as a way to sort of limit and eradicate fumigation. And I wholly disagree. Fumigation has its place in IPM, and IPM is used in fumigation. And I think that it's an integral part of what we do. But really, what we try to do here is we take information on entomological and environmental data and use some technology to manage pest damage in a way that sort of minimizes economic costs, and then maybe more importantly, the risks to people and property and the environment. From a broad perspective, it's a 5 again or a 6-step process, depending on who you ask. But there's really, 5 big steps with IPM. It all sort of starts with monitoring or inspecting. That's either visually or through the use of traps, whether it be pheromone traps or others. And then you move on to sort of identifying the pest and the host, whether it be a commodity or what have you. A lot of teams will have a staff entomologist, but you can always use, state extensions to identify a pest. But really what you're trying to do is understand the pest and its behaviors, because to know the pest is to know the solution. So you really need to get to know the pest, and in this case, what it doesn't like. After that step, you're going to do, what I call an assessment. And this is where it's important to understand what economic or I call it the human injury aspect of the pest. Usually it's referred to as thresholds, but this is sort of where the line in the sand is drawn, right? Is it 1 pest? Is it 5 pests in a month? And each situation will sort of be different. But it's important to determine when, not what at this stage. You're determining when you're going to take an action. And then speaking of action or implementation, it's its own subcategory because it's so nuanced and dense in the actions that a pest control operator or an organization can take. I'll try to narrow it down to 4 very broad actions that can be taken. I know that there are far more, so all you IPM experts, try not to at me, but I'm trying to keep it short and conversational here. But really, the actions broadly would be cultural, mechanical, biological, or chemical, and then you can break those down into each of their own hour-long podcasts, Ben. But
Oh, yeah.
really, those are the 4 actions you can take. But then you need to evaluate, right? Did what I do work? How could I have done it better? Do I need to do the same thing again, or do I need to completely pivot? And this is a really, really, really important step, because this step often gets skipped or shortcutted. And that's where we run into problems with using too much or too little or overusing an action. Resistance and regulation, those are the 2 R's that we're trying to avoid from my side. So
Yeah.
if you do this evaluation step properly, you can hopefully avoid those 2 R's, because the tools in our toolbox are already so limited, and we need to use them wisely and efficiently and protect them. Those are the 5 really big steps that you go through with IPM from my perspective. The 6th step that is sort of overarching, that doesn't come up in most people's IPM plans, but it's something that I hold near and dear to my heart, is the first step in all of this is that you need to develop an IPM plan. Go through each of these and figure out what they mean to you, whether it be the monitoring and inspection. How are you going to do it? Where are you going to do it? How are you going to assess? What are your thresholds? Why are your thresholds there? What actions do you have at your disposal? Maybe if you're an organic facility or something like that, they're very limited. So, and then how are you going to evaluate? How are you going to measure your success? So that's the 6th step, and it's sort of a sub-step that isn't always talked about. That's IPM to me. And one more thing to note, I think it's important to realize that IPM is a cycle. It's a circle. When you finish the evaluation step, you're often jumping right back into the monitoring, inspecting, and identification. And really, sometimes some of these steps are skipped and some of these steps can be shortened, but it's really a continuous cycle that you need to go through, as long as you're in operation. Little long-winded, but that's IPM for you.
No, you bring up some really excellent points here. I mean, I do definitely think that the IPM approach is cyclic. I think that you will repeat the same processes over and over again. And while those processes kind of remain the same, I don't really think there's such a thing as like a cookie cutter IPM approach that you can use at every different facility that you're going to implement it in. Because all these facilities are different. They're in different geographies. They're going to have different commodities, different temperatures, different humidities, and unfortunately, sometimes vastly different sanitation concerns need to be taken into account. Not every place is as clean as the other place. So all of that plays a part in what kind of an IPM plan that you're gonna be implementing at these locations. So it's really hard to treat this like a cookie cutter thing. I mean, the processes, the steps are going to be the same on paper, but when you're implementing them, they could be vastly different. You could spend significantly more time on the inspection part than you do the treatment part, or you could spend a lot more time on the pest identification part, or you could spend a lot more time on the evaluation part because all of these facilities are so different.
Yeah, it's really important for us as pest control operators, or if any of the listeners out there are parts of larger organizations and food companies and things like that. It's important to have someone that is extremely flexible in their thoughts and thorough. To be honest with you, those are the two characteristics I would say that are the most important for an IPM expert.
Yeah, in my opinion, I think it took at least our industry a little bit to kind of get behind it and understand the approach. Simply because, I mean, when I started out in the industry 22 years ago now, I think, wow, it's been a while. But when I started, 22 some odd years ago, I mean, there was a lot of scenarios where people just said, hey, let's just fumigate, get back to square one. And then in 3 months, when we have more pest pressure, we'll just fumigate again and we'll get back to square one. And so, and not to say that these facilities weren't cognizant of sanitation and structural concerns and all that, because that's always been a concern. I think that's never went away. But I think that the solution to pest infestations was always just, hey, let's throw the biggest hammer we have at it every time. And that's expensive and it's time consuming. And it's not always the best option. I mean, so I think us figuring out how to implement IPM and looking at sanitation and looking at structural controls and looking at some of the other tools that we have has been beneficial for us in the long run, because I think a lot of these organizations need experts that can look at this in a non-static fashion. I mean, we're not trap checkers anymore. We're not a spray and pray industry anymore.
No.
So, there's value associated with what we do in the inspections and how we treat facilities and in how we make suggestions to facilities on how to better prepare themselves for potential insect infestations and how to better prevent that. So I think that in a way, we've kind of added value to our industry in pest control by implementing a lot of these IPM approaches.
I certainly agree with that, Ben. It's, again, we are fumigation experts and we fit into one little corner. What we do at our core really fits into one little corner of IPM. But, myself and all of my team, we implement every single step of the IPM process. Even if someone calls us and said, hey, we need to fumigate, we still go through all of these processes, whether it be the inspection part, the identification part. We look at other control options before we move to the chemical control. It's part of our due diligence as stewards of the industry, as stewards of the environment. And I think that, like you said, it's changed so much, again, like in the last 10 years that I've been around, that IPM is not only something cool and great to use and a tagline, it is absolutely mandatory in our organization and I think across our industry.
Yeah, and I know I dated myself a little bit by saying I've been in the industry about 22 years, and I know you mentioned, a timeline of 10 years. When do you think, when did the IPM approach really kind of begin in earnest, in your opinion?
Yeah, that's another thing that's a little divisive. If you look it up, which I did many years ago, this has been part of my presentations. It's 19 or early 1970s. It started to really come through the government agencies here in the States, and of course, in true American fashion, we take credit for starting IPM in 1972. But I happen to remember one of your fantastic presentations that I've watched over the years. I can't remember if it was before you were with this organization or not, but I think that you said that the IPM has been around since ancient times, since the Sumerians and things like that. So I don't know if you want to talk about that for a second, but I remember you saying that, and I think about it every time when the conversation of IPM comes up. So.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting that you mentioned that, because I think that we as a civilization, we've been practicing the IPM approach for millennia before it was actually defined as IPM. So I think what you're referring to is, I actually have a slide that I pop up that talks about, the first use of pesticides on record took place with the Sumerian people of modern Iraq, which was about 2500 BC. Now that's using sulfur compounds and things like that to actually repel and kill insects. But there was actually, around 300 BC, the Chinese were actually planting crops at specific times to try to avoid pest infestations. And they also were going through the process of like introducing natural enemies or natural pests to repel certain insects to keep them off their crops, like things like training ants to attack bugs that are on citrus fruits and things like that. So, and that's an IPM approach. That's inspecting an area, identifying pests, and then coming up with some kind of a control measure to take care of those pests that it's non-chemical in nature.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes chemical in nature too. Again, the IPM approach includes chemical treatments, but it's just interesting to think that that even as far back as 2500 BC to 300 BC, that we as humans were coming up with ways to inspect and identify pests and then control them. So it's been around a long time, much longer than when we have this current definition.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, that's a classic biological control.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. So I did want to also ask, I know what their control methods were back then, introducing ants to help attack bugs on citrus and all that. But I think there are a lot of tools that we use when we're implementing IPM. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of talk about some of those tools, things like chemical control, biological control, fumigation, just kind of talk about some of those tools that we have in that IPM toolbox.
Yeah, no, I sort of touched on it before. I look at these as actions. I'll break it down again into four. There are many more, but the first in my mind would be cultural. And from my perspective, this is all about being a bad host for the pests.
Yeah.
So think of it when you have guests at your house that you don't particularly enjoy being there, and how do you make them leave and make them not want to come back? Pests really, they want three things. They want harborage to mate and live and chill. They want food, and most need some form of moisture. So back to my analogy, if you don't give a guest a safe, quiet, comfortable place to watch TV and sleep, you don't grill steaks for them and turn the water off, they'll be out of there in a flash.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, if you're providing them with everything they want and need right there, they'll never leave, and they'll probably have kids and be there until you stop them. So I know it's sort of a silly analogy, but
that's perfect. It's perfect analogy.
take away anything that they need or want. If they like it dark, make it bright. If they like it moist, make it dry. And I know that's easier said than done in a lot of cases, but as far as creating a poor culture for pests, that's really where it begins and ends for me. There are also sort of in that vein, there are some mechanical controls. I like to refer to them as physical controls. Things like screens on doors, good door sweeps, air curtains, traps, whether it be for rodents or insects, are a good example of mechanical controls. Sealing up any penetrations, that allow pests to get in is a good place to start. And really, once they're in, finding a way to remove them or eradicate them is a big step in mechanical controls. Biological controls, this would be sort of like you were talking, the use of natural enemies. I don't have a ton of experience in this, to be perfectly honest. So biological controls, resistant strains and natural enemies to the pest are really where that begins. I don't know if you want to chime in on biological controls at all, but
You can even do some things, and this kind of falls into a couple of buckets on this IPM toolbox. But I mean, things as simple as making sure that you are planting plant. If you have plants like say shrubbery along the front of your building, making sure that you're planting shrubbery that is maybe not as conducive to pests as other types of shrubbery. I mean, anything can be constituted as a biological control. If you're planting something, if you're using something that's alive in some capacity to control something or restrict something else from coming into that area, I mean, all of that falls into that category. It's not something that we really practice very often. It's more reactionary. So, for example, what I would consider to be kind of a biological control, but it also falls into some other buckets. If you show up to a facility and they're having a big ant problem, say along one wall inside their food processing area, you go to the outside and you find that the ants are harboring in the shrubbery on the outside of the building. Well, biological control would be to remove those living shrubs, remove their harboring area, and you'll eliminate the problem. So I myself personally kind of, even though that's a kind of a mechanical control also, and it's kind of a cultural control, it really kind of falls into that biological control bucket as well.
Yeah, I think often, biological controls, we specialize in post-harvest, and I think that a lot of biological controls will come in the planting and pre-harvest and
Yes. Oh yeah.
things
Yeah.
like that. So, I think that all three of those are great and they sort of come first, but there are also chemical controls, right? And this would, in some cases, be considered the last resort or the big hammer, as you called it. But in many cases, depending on your thresholds, it may be the only option. So there are varying options and degrees of chemical control, but it can really sort of be broken down into two categories: the biorationals, which would be like repellents and botanicals and minerals and synthetics, things like diatomaceous earth and pyrethrum and IGRs. Those sort of fall into that bucket. And then, of course, we have the conventional pesticides and my wheelhouse, the broad spectrum solutions like fumigants. They're super non-selective and will kill basically anything in the area that are applied. Chemical controls obviously have their place in the action part of the IPM cycle. I would say we could have a whole podcast on that, but we've had like 3 seasons on chemical
Yeah.
controls. So that's chemical controls, fumigants and broad spectrum pesticides.
Yeah. I think you already kind of talked about this just a little bit in just what you were saying, but is there any order in which you would choose these tools?
Yeah, Ben, I think it sort of depends on the situation and the thresholds. To be honest with you, like we already talked a little bit about biological controls. So if you come into a flour mill or a food processing facility or something like that, I think your biological controls are going to be pretty limited. But by and large, you want to start with the least intense and the most selective, I guess, treatment possible. You want to start with the mechanical controls. You want to start with the cultural controls first. Sanitation is huge. You can eradicate many pest infestations and reinfestations just with sanitation alone. So I would say, yeah, you start with cultural and mechanical and biological if that's applicable to you. And then in the subcategory of chemical controls, I would say that you have to be very careful about which chemical you choose. It all sort of goes back to the use pattern of the chemical, the biology and the entomology of the target pest, and things like that. So I would say that yes, there is a specific order, but it's going to depend on your situation. If you're in a medical facility or a pharmaceutical facility whose thresholds are zero, you may not have time to use the other methods, and you may have to go straight for the big hammer. That's sort of a roundabout way to answer your question. Yes and no is
Yeah.
the answer
Yeah.
to that question.
Again, just like the IPM approach, facility to facility is not cookie cutter. The order in which you use the tools aren't necessarily going to be cookie cutter either. But I do want to dig into the cultural control part of it a little bit deeper, because I think in most cases that's kind of where you start, because I think the cultural control is where the inspection starts. It's where the pest identification starts. And then also we have to think about all these facilities and the culture of these facilities. I know that human beings are very habitual, and it's really easy to get into doing the same thing the same way every single time, every single day. And I think when we get habitual like that, sometimes we miss things. So if you have a facility that's performing inspections and they're performing inspections in the same places, in the same format, and they're looking in the same direction every single time, it becomes easier to miss things that are kind of right in front of your face. I've been guilty of it myself. There's been situations where I've went in and performed pest inspections at facilities, and I do it. I did it once a month, and I did the same facility for 2, 3, 4 years in a row. And you get into this habit of where you even walk in the same direction when you're implementing these inspections. If you do something as simple as just turning around and performing your inspection in the opposite direction, you'd be amazed at the things that you will see that you wouldn't otherwise see. So it's important to, have the steps in place, follow the steps, but break the habits in that culture. And along with that, I think it's important to make sure that everybody is trained properly and knows what to look for during those inspections. Because, we as fumigators, we as pest control operators, whatever the case is, we may not be inside that facility every single day. We may be there once a week, once a month, whatever the contract dictates. Or if we're doing a fumigation, we're only there to inspect pre-fumigation, whatever the case is. But
Right.
the people who own the facility or the people that work at the facility or who are responsible at the facility, they should be conducting their own inspections and alerting us when things aren't correct or correcting them themselves if it's sanitation, whatever the case is. But again, we're habitual. It's really easy for us to go through the flow, go through the motions, and check the certain places in a certain fashion, in a certain order. And that's where we can start missing things.
Yeah, no doubt. And while you were speaking, I was thinking, let's dig a little bit even deeper into cultural, because again, it's everything begins there, cultural and mechanical. So on the cultural note, something as simple as, you can have really good door sweeps and you can have really tight doors, but if individuals in your facility, we'll say loaders or forklift drivers or receptionists or whoever, at 3 o'clock every day when the boss leaves, decide that they're going to prop the back door open
Yeah.
to take a smoke break or let some air in or whatever it is. All of those cultural and mechanical controls sort of go out the window, which leads me into the thought that maybe it's a good idea, and this is something that we try to pass along to others, facility managers, and even other PCOs. Try to educate your teams on IPM. Now, I'm not saying that they need to sit down and listen to a 3-hour lecture on it, or even this podcast for that matter, but just let them know, hey man, you have to keep the doors closed because of X, Y, or Z. I know you don't like rodents. I don't like rodents. If you leave the door open, there's a good chance you're going to have rodents. So,
Yeah.
keep the doors closed. So it seems very simple and elementary, but in the onboarding process or maybe in a newsletter or something like that, it wouldn't hurt to send out just the basic principles of, you don't even have to call it IPM, just the basic principles of being a good steward of your facility. And I can't hammer the point home enough that although I'm in the fumigation business and it's a big part of what we do, cultural and mechanical controls do two things. They preserve our tools in the toolbox, and they also sort of save your bacon on the back end, because a lot of times claims of failed fumigations are not that. They're reinfestations because of failed measures, either on the mechanical control side or the cultural control side. So it's a good way to sort of protect yourself, educate the customer, and hammer the point home that IPM is important.
Yeah, and again, the education's important too. And it's not just educating the QA managers, the plant managers, and other management staff. I mean, it always amazes me how much of a difference it can make to even just educate your fork truck drivers on basic insect identification techniques. These are the folks that are loading and unloading product on and off of trailers into and out of your facility all the time. I can't tell you how many times that's saved a company an infestation because a fork truck driver's been educated on pest identification. They drive into the back of a trailer to lift a pallet, and they see Indian meal moss kind of fluttering around it, and they're like, "Oh, wait a minute, this is infested." They stop, they shut the trailer down, they move it out, and they fumigate the trailer off site. And what that does is that minimizes the risk of an infestation inside the whole plant. So now they don't have to worry about an infestation inside the plant, and they can treat the trailer before they bring the product in. So things as simple as that can really make a huge difference on infestation numbers inside of a facility.
Yeah, without question. I'm like you. I've seen it, not a million, but I've seen
Yeah.
it a lot of times, and I've also seen the converse of that. Where an inbound infested shipment was not intercepted and controlled, and especially like we started this podcast out at this time of year, things can spiral quickly. So, and then that's where we get ourselves into a situation like we spoke of before, where you lose all of those steps, you lose all these other options, and you have to go straight for the big hammer.
Yes, absolutely. So I only have one question left for you, Blake. And, you've been on the podcast every season, so I know you're used to this question. And because I always ask a version of this with every person that
Yeah, I gotta come up with some new content.
Yeah. But what advice would you give a new fumigator or a new pest control operator about utilizing the integrated pest management approach?
So I would say that, the first step would be to educate yourself in exactly what it is and why it's being implemented. Again, not to take it back to fumigation, but I sort of have a vested interest to do that. But from our side, the IPM is going to be critical to preserving our tools. We're down to, I'll call it 2.5, maybe 2 3/4 tools on the fumigation side right now. IPM plays a huge role in that. I would say educate yourself in each of these steps and know why and how to implement them. But most importantly to me, I would say it comes back to that evaluation step. Monitoring, inspecting is very important. All the steps are very important, but the evaluation step, you need to take a good, hard, honest look at what you've done. Did it work? Was it too much? Was it too little? Could we have done better? Could we have been more efficient? So yeah, the evaluation part of it to me stands out and stands above all of the other parts. And the evaluation, that's not just a self-talk. That needs to be a collaborative effort with your whole team. And if you're providing services with the clients and maybe with others, even in the industry, I know that we do a lot of evaluation with our partners in the industry. So I would say that focus on all of them, but put a gold star beside the evaluation step.
Yep. I absolutely agree with you every step of the way on that. I think knowing how to inspect properly, knowing how to evaluate a facility, knowing how to identify pests, or knowing where you can go to get the pests identified, that's going to set you up for success or failure with every other step.
No doubt.
Yeah.
No doubt. Yeah.
Well, Blake, thanks again for your time today. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure we will have you on season 6 when it launches.
Yeah, Ben, I really appreciate the opportunity and look forward to hearing it and looking forward to hearing from others, and stay safe out there. Appreciate it.
I want to thank Blake for discussing integrated pest management with us. Understanding how to look at a facility with prevention in mind helps a lot when you're trying to plan for the actual pest control treatments. On the next episode of Degish America Presents, we'll be talking about another very common treatment besides fumigation: ULV foggings. And remember, if you have a question you'd like for us to answer, please feel free to email us at podcast@degishamerica.com. Or you can also find us on our website at degishamerica.com or on all of the main social media outlets. So until next time, I'm Ben Harrell, and I hope you have a safe and terrific day.